In writing your book, Jen, what was the biggest surprise to you?
Well, I went into these interviews asking people to not think that any detail was too small, and certainly having the luxury of time to just sit with families and interview them multiple times and not have to run out to the live truck to make that deadline. So part of what was surprising to me was just peeling away some of those emotional layers of myself, right? We kind of have to build up that armor over the years where it's not that you're not sympathetic to what people are going through, but you have a really important job to do. And if you don't leave their living room in time, the community is not hearing this story. So being able to take a step away from that was really a luxury. And then the other surprising thing about writing the book, and what I found incredibly fulfilling, and that I hope other journalists learn when they read the book, is just the power and the impact of the stories we do, because we're always rushing off to the next story, and because we don't continue to return to these stories over the years, we don't really understand sometimes what happens to people. For example, Darren Drake, for example, he's the subject of chapter 6 of my book. He was riding his bike on the pedestrian path in lower Manhattan on Halloween in 2017, and he was struck and killed by a terrorist, by someone who had rented a truck to kill people in lower Manhattan and intentionally drove it on that pedestrian path. And that was such a tragedy, this wonderful young man. And I interviewed his parents the day after it happened, if you can imagine that. I spoke with his father. And here we are now, almost 5 years after that happened. The parents have started a foundation in his memory. There is a bill that has already passed in the House of Representatives and is waiting to be voted on in the Senate that would make it more difficult for people to rent trucks if there was a suspicion that they were going to use it for something like this. And here are these parents who are now giving out scholarships, and they've done all of this in their son's memory. And that sort of thing is really important. And even Paul Esposito, who survived the Staten Island ferry crash. I interviewed Paul in 2003, almost 19 years ago. And here's Paul today. He lost both legs in the ferry crash, and he's thriving. He's an advocate for other people with disabilities. He's living this beautiful life in Florida. And when I interviewed him from his hospital bed 2 days after this 24-year-old lost both his legs, I just could never have imagined the way his story would end up. And so it was so joyful for me to hear about these people and be inspired by them. Look, we all face adversity in our lives, right? But to see the way the people who I feature in my book have triumphed over that, I think there's a lesson in there for everybody.
To hear these stories, the treatment that you've given these stories really fills my heart with joy because I've wondered about Paul Esposito for many years. He's one of the first stories that I covered. I was a cub reporter back then, but I remember that Staten Island ferry crash and just how horrific it was. I had no idea what I was doing. I did not understand. I mean, I was new to news and I was trying to figure it all out, but his story really stayed with me. And so you've given me the answer that I have wanted all these years. I've been wondering I really have, some people just stay with you.